Hello class, today we're going to be doing our presentation on Vestigial Structures, Anatomy Forgotten by Time. This presentation is by Austin Anderson,
Virtual Laguna,
Mario Aranda.
We'll be exploring a concept called vestigial structures, but first let's understand what they are. So what exactly is a vestigial structure? Well, it's a body part or organ that seems to have no apparent function in the organism that has it. They are likely left from our past ancestors who used them for a specific function. Take the appendix, for example. In our ape ancestors, this little pouch-like organ played an important role in helping digest tough plant material by storing microbes that break down cellulose found in plant cell walls. Well, what makes the human appendix vestigial? Well, it's our change in diet. Unlike our leaf-eating ancestors, we've evolved and now consume a wide variety of foods such as meat. Now, why are these vestigial structures important? They serve as an important evidence of our evolutionary history. By studying them, scientists can uncover clues about how organisms have changed over time and adapted to different environments. It's like putting a puzzle together of the past to understand how life forms have evolved into what they are today. Imagine a species transitioning from one environment to the another. Picture a creature that once roamed the land, now adapting to life underwater. What changes do you think would occur in its body? Take a moment to discuss with your classmate. You can pause the video if you need to. Well, they could now have web feet or gills, or the other way around from water to land and have lost these features. Now, let's consider another transition, from the sky to a cave. Think about the difference between flying freely in the open sky and navigating the dark inside of a cave. What adaptations is the best for survival in such a drastic change of habitat? Pause the video if you need to. Well, they could have reduced wings or enhanced senses, etc. Now, let's go back to our discussions on vestigial structures. As organisms adapt to new environments, certain body parts may become no longer useful, leading to the development of vestigial structures over time. Just like how the human appendix lost its original function as our diets change, other organisms follow similar changes as they adapt to new ways of life.
So for our first vestigial structure, we're going to talk about snakes where their hips don't lie. Before snakes were the slithery creatures that we see roaming today, their ancestors were lizards that lived underground. These ancient reptiles spent their days burrowing into the earth, seeking shelter from predators and harsh weather conditions. But as time went on and environments changed, some of these burrowing lizards found that having legs wasn't as useful as it used to be. They started to adapt to their underground lifestyle by becoming more streamlined and agile. Slowly, their legs became less necessary and they began to shrink and eventually disappear or get smaller altogether. Fast forward to today, we have modern day snakes, which are adapted to life without legs. But if you look closely at certain snake species like boas and pythons, you can notice some tiny bumps near their tails. These bumps are actually remnants of the legs that their ancestors once had. And while these vestigial legs no longer serve a purpose for their movement, they still show their evolutionary journey. Now moving on to whales where their hips also don't lie. They were once four-legged mammals or artiodactyls, which for example are goats and deers, were once well adapted to move around on land. As whales transitioned from land-dwelling mammals to ocean-dwelling creatures, they no longer needed their hind limbs for activities like walking or supporting their body weight. As a result, the pelvic bones, which were once needed for supporting the hind limbs, gradually became smaller and less useful. Eventually, manicure for the manatees. Long ago, before manatees became the slow-swimming creatures we know today, their ancestors lived on land. Their ancestors had fingernails just like we do, and these nails might have been useful for things like gripping onto branches or digging in the ground, much like the claws of some animals today. But as time passed, the world changed. The land that once provided a comfortable home for the manatees became harsher, and the waters nearby offered safety and food. So little by little, these land-dwelling ancestors began to spend more time in the water. So as these creatures spent more and more time in the water, they didn't need their hands and nails as much, which over time, the nails became smaller and smaller, eventually turning into what we see today, tiny vestigial fingernails. As these creatures adapted to life in the water, they needed something else to help them swim efficiently, and that's where their flippers come in. Over time, their limbs stretched out and turned into a paddle-like flipper that we see on manatees and other aquatic mammals today. Have you ever noticed those little extra claws higher up on your dog's or cat's leg? Those are called dew claws. Dew claws are like leftover thumbs, but they're not as useful as they used to be. In the past, when dogs and cats had to climb and hunt, dew claws helped them grip onto things. However, as dogs and cats' lifestyles changed, these extra claws became less necessary. Over time, many dogs and cats lost the need for extensive climbing or hunting as they became more domesticated and relied on humans for food and shelter. Eventually, dew claws gradually lost their original function and became less useful. Today, while some dogs and cats may still use their dew claws for certain tasks like gripping toys or scratching, many don't really need them.
So before horses looked the way they do now, they were actually a dog-sized early form of a horse called Hyracotherium or Ehippus, where they actually had 3 to 4 functional toes instead of 1. So Ehippus lived in a more forested area and lived much like our modern-day deer would. They would roam and look for grasses and bushes that they could eat from. As time passed, the forest that they once called home became more of a field. And with that, they needed to adapt for a more endurance-based lifestyle where they can run away from predators. As they evolved, their 3 out of the 4 main fingers begin to become reduced, and that one big finger becomes very dense and large. This allows them to carry more weight because it's all put into one big dense bone as opposed to a bunch of little skinny bones. Also, this allows them to have more endurance because they're not using energy trying to flex their toes while they run. So before birds even had the ability to fly, they came from a species of dinosaurs, much like seen here, this Caudipteryx. They would use their feathers for insulation so they could regulate their body temperature and protect themselves from the sun. As they began experimenting with these feathers, where they could hop and glide a little bit, they began to see it being more advantageous to be able to fly. Some of these birds thought it more advantageous to go back to the land and live the lifestyle of their ancestors. All of these birds, except for the ostrich, all live on an island. This is because these islands tend to lack big mammal predators that the birds would have to fly away from. Because of this lack of predators, there was no real reason to fly, and their wings began to become useless for the act of flying. Now, their feathers are used for insulation, much like their dinosaur relatives, as well as display. So what happens whenever you move into a cave? So one case that we see is the blind cavefish, which is actually a species of tetra, which we still see today that are found in rivers very close to the caves of these blind cavefish. So these tetras came from those species and then were maybe flushed into the cave during a rainstorm. And after millions of years of staying in these caves, they've actually lost their eyeballs. This phenomenon is not just seen in these cavefish, but also many species of cave-dwelling organisms. These are our references, and thank you so much for watching.